Hello, sparkly beans, and welcome to my very first reading roundup. Yay! If you are new here, maybe you're a booktube person, hi, I'm so happy to have you. My name's Avery. I'm a writer and a change doula, and I love reading nonfiction. So some of the topics that I'm really into, activism, social justice, all different kinds of justice and liberation. I'm also really into healing, spirituality, and intuition, and then supportive systems. So what just structures and systems for being human in the world. So what you might think of as like self-development, self-help, but from kind of a somewhat critical, like anti-capitalist lens. So if you're interested in that stuff, I'm also queer and neurodivergent, and I love new friends, so welcome. The idea for doing this series actually came from booktube. Gosh, it was a few years ago when I stumbled upon booktube and I was really excited that it existed, and then I very quickly realized that pretty much everything was fiction. And I even thought about like starting a channel that was specifically would be, I think this was before I had this channel. I thought about starting like a nonfiction booktube channel. I think the only one like that I found at the time was on like business books. And there were a few people, like to acknowledge, there were a few people who were doing nonfiction videos, but usually it was in a whole sea of fiction. And so I did really like want to and like the idea of talking about what I read. So I didn't get to it back then, and I'm not planning to have a full booktube channel now, but I do read almost exclusively nonfiction, and I really enjoy writing book reviews. Folks enjoy reading them, and so I wanted to bring some of that over here to YouTube. So if you are here because you're into nonfiction books, that's awesome. I'll be putting all of my book videos into a Reading Roundup playlist, and I'll include Reading Roundup in the title so that it'll be easy to find them if that's what you're interested in. So go ahead and subscribe so that you'll see those. And then if you've been here a while, you know that I've been doing books kind of like stuffed into my monthly reflection videos. I decided to split that out, both to make it easier for folks who are just into books, but then also so that I'm not necessarily talking about things that I read this month or that came out this month. Instead, I thought it would be fun to do kind of a roundup of 2 or more books that are going to have different takes or different angles on a topic. So I'll give you a little bit of a summary of the book, but particularly with reference to the topic that that crosses over between them, give you the author's angle on that, and then kind of my own take, my own synthesis. And so if you are interested in one of the books, I will include links below with the full Goodreads review so that you can see my review of the whole book, and then you can check it out if you're interested. Okay, so what we're talking about today, to introduce you to what the topic kind of is. So you can see from the title, I was thinking about all of these terms like empath, highly sensitive person, psychic, intuitive, and like to give a little information quickly about where I come from on this topic. I have always been a highly intuitive person, I would say, although I also kind of tried to shut that down a lot from like maybe age 11 or 12 to like my early 30s. I was really trying to be like rational and logical and shove aside anything intuitive and anything that was kind of received information. I did have experiences when I was younger of receiving information from something other than my 5 senses, but as a lot of people do, I think as I grew up, I kind of pushed that away and didn't focus on it and thought it was just like not real or something. And I do now identify as intuitive. I also, starting in like late 2020, like I'd always sort of received information, like a knowing, a just sort of inner knowing, that could be really clear. But as I was developing that and coming back to that and consciously developing my intuition, trying to live from a more intuitive place, make decisions from that place, embrace that, and then studying tarot and astrology. In late 2020 in the fall, I had my first kind of what I would call a psychic or a channeled experience where I was getting like very specific words, images, etc., and had a very clear sense of like this is what we're doing, this is what we're focusing on. As those who've been here for a while know, it's what led me to become a writer and a change doula full time and to start this business. So that was happening. And I also like I just have this general sense of like sometimes I just feel like I'm kind of processing things for the collective in a way that isn't related necessarily to my own emotions or needs, but like I can really feel energies sometimes, or like tune into an energy and have like a sense of sort of a collective need or something that's going on. I think a lot of folks do. But also, I've noticed that when I do like guided experiences, like maybe a guided meditation, maybe a like I've tried to do like those like past life regression, like some of those videos you can find online for different things, or like hypnosis, that I don't necessarily have like super vivid images or like the feeling of being outside my body, or a sense of like I am fully, or even like a large percentage immersed in something else. It's often more like words or, like a sense of something, but it's not super clear. And so I'd sort of, with that, like wondered, like, I don't know, maybe this is, like, maybe I'm less intuitive than I think I am, maybe it's different. I'm really grateful to intuition teachers who talk about intuition as coming through in different ways. And I've been able to acknowledge and embrace that my, sometimes like intuition, for example, can come through memory, where you might think like, oh, why am I having this random memory? Like I want to be having a vision of XYZ. It's like, no, that is the way, like the particular memory that came up is the way that something is communicating with you. So I have embraced that, but I kind of wondered about these labels and like, do they apply? The other piece is that I am a very sensitive person by the general definition of that term. I always have been. I was really emotionally sensitive as a kid. Again, tried to like kind of turn that off around the same period from like 11 or 12. And that one was harder to keep out, right? I thought, oh, it's just that I'm like weird and awkward and a nerd. And so like I'm emotionally, like people are always hurting me. I thought for a while like, oh, maybe I'm depressed. Maybe it's depression, like that I'm randomly sensitive and crying in public places. When I learned about rejection sensitive dysphoria, which I do identify with, although I think there's some problematic things about the term. Like I think it's something that we need to continue to develop, but I definitely relate to that. And as an adult, as I discovered my neurodivergence, that I'm ADHD and autistic, I started to think, oh, okay, well, maybe some of that sensitivity is related to that neurotype. And I didn't think that I could be an empath because I actually had a partner who was an empath, and it was a very, like the way they experienced it was very clear. And then also like they had that thing where they pick up on something and you don't know that it exists. And I was like, I don't know, am I that? I've had friends who say like, wow, like you're a really gentle presence, or like there's something energetically about you. Like I know I can work with energy and perceive energy and work with it, but I was sort of like, is that an empath? Is that because I don't know that right? So I was just trying to like sort all this out. And that's how I came to these books. So I just want to be clear, when I review books, I always like to say like, here's where I'm coming from, because that may not match you, but that's where I came to this, is that I was interested in understanding how these terms are used. Are there clear definitions? If there are, what are those definitions? I was also wondering, like, maybe if I would find, in reading more about this, if I might find anything that would be helpful in understanding the blend of what does it mean to be intuitive, and then also to have maybe maybe like mental health stuff, cognitive stuff like rejection sensitivity. Like how do all these things play together? I should mention that I'm not reviewing in this video, but I have read The Highly Sensitive Person by Elaine Aron, right? I believe it's Elaine Aron. Double check that, but I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Which is the sort of like foundational text that started with that label. That's who came up with that highly sensitive person. And none of these books are directly about highly sensitive person, although one of them does like get into distinguishing that from being an empath, as we'll talk about. I didn't feel comfortable reviewing that here just because it's been so long since I read it, and I honestly kind of want to reread it now. But just so you know, when I read that book, which was a number of years ago, my conclusion at that time was that I wasn't a highly sensitive person, but that I was kind of close. And as I recall, she talks about like highly sensitive person is this particular designation, but then there's kind of things leading up to it, and you might be in the gray area. So I thought, oh, I'm kind of in the gray area. And then I was interested to learn a little more about being an empath, about like psychic skills, and just like wondering, is it possible that maybe it's not that I'm highly sensitive, it's that I'm an empath and I just turned that off for a while, and maybe that's the thing you need to develop. I just wasn't sure. So I came in and I read these 3 books. So we'll go through them one by one. Starting with a book called Embrace Your Empathy by Christy Robinette. Of course, apologies to any of these authors if I mispronounced the names. I think I've basically got them, but apologies, because names are important. So Embrace Your Empathy came out this February from Llewellyn. Robinette, she is a psychic medium and an empath. And in her book, she gets very specific. So she definitely categorizes types of empaths. She talks about physical empaths, emotional empaths, intuitive empaths, and then the earth empath, which she divides into a bunch of subtypes. As happens sometimes in these books, where there's like a whole categorization system, but then the author is all of them, right? So the author is like, I'm a very strong empath and I'm all of these things. And to be clear, I'm not doubting that, right? I'm not doubting her experience, but it is a very, very strong, clear, at least from the perspective of her writing now, right? I'm sure there was confusion in the past, but writing now, it's very clear, and in a way that I think as somebody who doesn't have those clear experiences is kind of like, okay. And then the way that she does those categories, everybody's gonna be an empath. So this is a little pet peeve I sometimes have about these books, is I understand that it's not necessarily a technical term, right? That different people use it differently. Different people are probably trying to like sway the conversation in different directions. I didn't expect to have it be like, here's a clear, and I think even clear definitions we can problematize, right? Like the DSM, DSM-5, a lot of us have feelings about some of those descriptions and what's considered a disorder and what isn't, and how different things are split out, right? These are all decisions made by humans to categorize, and language is something that evolves. And I'm a big language nerd, and so, I acknowledge that. But I do have a pet peeve with these kinds of books where they give little quizzes, or in this case, it's like bulleted lists. And, if you are 1 or 2 of these, or if you're 2 or more, then you are probably this. And then they do it in such a way that anybody who reads the book is going to think they're that. And then they cast it as, like, you are special, you are different from others because of these things. They're just really broad, really general experiences in the lists. And because the sort of cutoff point is very low, which she does, to be fair, because everybody's going to be different, right? And like somebody could have a really strong experience of 1 or 2, but still it's very broad. And so, yeah, I like that, like on the plus side of this book, like she does talk to parents and partners, helping to kind of help people understand that the way people sense is different. I think that's great. There's also a lot of like love and light, a lot of new agey stuff that honestly comes across as spiritual bypassing to me. There are a few cringy things in the book. I mean, check out my review for the details, but I don't love the handling of, kind of seems to be splitting neurodivergence from being an empath, as if those are two separate things that can't overlap. It's not explicitly said, but there's a bit of that feeling. I think it could be ultimately validating for some people, but I didn't really come away with a stronger understanding. And a lot of the tips and guidance are just sort of general healing stuff. And some of it feels kind of like Instagram-y self-care, to be honest. So I didn't learn a whole lot from that one. The second book I read is called Psychic Skills for Magic and Witchcraft, and that's by Gina. This was in the same batch of Llewellyn releases in February. And again, this is somebody who has a system, or in Cole's case, not so much a system of types, but just like, here are these experiences, and I experience pretty much all of them. So this is someone who is psychic and a witch. I'm not going to talk about the witchcraft element as much in this video, given the topic, but again, you can check my review. It has a lot more on the witchcraft portion of it. This is a little more of an instructional guide, and so, it's step by step, and so this is from someone who has sort of gone through all of these processes, gives some fairly in-depth meditations that she's recommending you do over and over and over. And I do appreciate that she is clear that developing psychic skills is a process that takes time, and so she normalizes, things. She also really just normalizes that being psychic doesn't mean that you don't have any conscious thoughts or awareness, or like that anything doesn't creep in from your mind, that like even if you're in a kind of altered state, that doesn't mean that other stuff doesn't come in. So that was helpful for the thing I described of sort of not having like the clear visuals and clear stuff all the time. And she clearly it'll take time, and so I do think that it's entirely possible that, were I to do like more of meditation practice, more maybe some of the exercises in this book, I think over time it's very possible that I would have like clearer visions, clearer experiences, like out of body experiences, if that's something I wanted to do. But again, like her personal experience is some of the really like dramatic, kind of obvious stuff. And then she doesn't really talk about like, how do I know if I'm psychic? What does it mean to be psychic? I think like she does recognize that some folks don't know and may even have troubling experiences of not knowing or not understanding it, but then doesn't really talk about that. I think she's kind of assuming that the reader is psychic, knows they're psychic, and is just coming to this book to develop their skills. So I might try these. I haven't done the guided meditations. I honestly kind of hate when books are like, okay, here's a really long guided meditation and now record it in your own voice. I don't know about you, my voice is going to pull me out of it. So I wish they would provide, even if it was an extra fee, I wouldn't mind. Like, and she may actually, I haven't checked. Some of the other recent books I've read don't, but she may. But like, if they would just let me buy like them reading the meditation, that'd be great. Or even include it with the book would be a nice touch. But yeah, I might find them useful. But her approach in general is more about sort of developing these skills to act on others psychically. She does get into the ethics, and it's not like acting on others in a bad way, but it's a European witchcraft perspective of, or maybe just a witchcraft perspective of using your will to affect things, and that's just not something I'm interested in. So that wasn't super relevant. Again, there's some cringy stuff, especially in the witchcraft section, so do check the review. Again, I don't love the handling of neurodivergence, even though it's just a little bit in both books. So bottom line, after reading these two, I was sort of like, I don't know if I've learned anything, or I don't know if I'm any more sure about, my experience or how to understand it with these words. But then we get to a refreshing take, a book called The Space in Between, an Empath Field Guide. And this is written by Signe Hovem, published by She Writes Press. This was actually last fall. And Hovem, I think just honestly, and for a lot of the folks who may have been on my channel for a while, probably have similar kind of views. She aligns much better with me. So she's a spiritual counselor, does work sort of similar to what I do. She's an empath. She describes this book as a teaching memoir, and I found it really readable and relatable. Whether or not you end up deciding, yes, like empath is the word I want to use. She speaks really directly to the definition of terms and to the kind of process. So while both of these authors, first authors I covered, do get into some of the ethics and they do get into some of the like personal spiritual development, I found Hovem's take on this to be like more in depth, more relatable, more aligned with my own view, and more, I guess, nuanced. There is some, like a little bit of new agey stuff in here, especially like later in the book. I think it's always worth noting that when a white person uses the chakra system, like, you know, take with a grain of salt how much of that is kind of like add on. But it's not this lens of like, figure out whether you're this, and then if you are, then you're great and special and different, right? That is very much not her view. She does kind of hint that like some people may be more sensitive than others. Some people may naturally sort of have this ability of what she calls empathic sensing. But what's really interesting about her take is she actually doesn't call anyone an empath until they've done a lot of internal work. And the internal work here is not just about developing the skills of that perception, but it's actually doing the kind of internal mindfulness, observation, psychological kind of work that I think is really important for everyone. So I think anyone would actually benefit from doing the kinds of things she talks about, whether or not you are an empath or decide you're an empath or want to identify as an empath. And there's this very specific, you know, kind of breakaway where she's saying like, there's empathic sensing, and you might experience that and like pick up on things beyond the five senses, basically, in your environment. But being what she calls a functional empath is a journey, and it requires development, and nobody just is that like automatically. And so that was just like, that was a cool take. You know, I think she really embraces liminality, and there's kind of a cool like feel with the memoir and the kind of spiritual feel of just like embracing that, even though she actually is the one who's the most like willing to talk about categories and language. At the same time, she very much embraces the kind of gray areas in between categories, the fact that these aren't, you know, hard set in stone categories, and she prioritizes self-identification, which I think is really important. You know, I think it's a nice space in between the kind of everyone is this and then you are this and you're special. It's like everyone is different. Everyone's going to feel it differently. You get to decide how you identify, but also it's important to develop internally and do your inner work. So there's a lot of focus on knowing what is yours and what is yours to take on, what is you and what is not you. There's a little bit of this in Cole's book, in the second book I talked about, but more in the psychic context of like whether a psychic insight comes from you or not. In this case, it's more in the empath case, and I really liked Hovem's take. Yeah, this is work I'm already doing some, especially around like understanding what's a projection and what's not. Also, it made me think of if folks are into human design, which again, every time I mention human design, I like to say I'm not like there's whole ass problems to the way that it has been distributed, sold, marketed, etc. However, I think the framework can be useful. And if you're into human design, it made me think of open centers and the way that where you have open centers, which I have found very accurate to my own experience, being the places where you kind of take on others' stuff in the environment and you think it's yours, like taking on fear, taking on anxiety, I think that is an experience a lot of people have in different ways. And so doing some work around this can be really generative and helpful. So I think reading her insights on that could be helpful for some. But it also, I think, just made me go, I don't think, like, it kind of centered for me that, I don't know that focusing on like some sort of kind of specialist development of abilities is important for me. While I mentioned, for example, with Cole's book, it might be that I could do some work to perceive differently, or maybe like do some work that would allow me to better identify where things are coming from. It doesn't necessarily have to be, and this makes me a blank, which I already kind of, let's be honest, I'm non-binary, I'm very liminal in things, but sometimes categories can be helpful to find the functional stuff. I also really liked that this book was relevant to the question of sensitivity and like, what is empath sensitive? Are those the same thing? What's going on there? So she really helped clarify this for me. One point of view, but it made sense. And it jived with fairly well, I think, with what I remember, at least from the highly sensitive person. So she talks directly about that category and being an empath. And also just more generally, this book is very relevant to if you're a sensitive person, if you tend to be a people pleaser as well, I think you would relate to this. She focuses on, so her idea of empath is very grounded in the earth and in sensing. So it's not like this is supernatural, this is like you say things like sixth sense, and she points out like sense is the important word there, but I think some people focus on the sixth, some people focus on the different, unusual, otherworldly. Here she's saying, no, it's grounded. It's just that like some of us are more, open or maybe have done more work and thus are more able to have sensory experiences that are expanded. So being an empath is an expanded sensory experience. And then HSP, there is some overlap there, but the distinction she makes is that she would say an empath is more about picking up on others' sort of unprocessed feelings, thoughts, emotions, things they've kind of displaced subconsciously into the environment that empaths then pick up. And the challenge with an empath is that an empath may then either A, take it on as their own, or, which I think is something I really struggle with, whether or not it's that I'm picking up displaced stuff. I'll talk about that in a moment. But they may take it on as their own. They also may feel like they need to fix it, or like they need to like actively pull that person in and like be involved. And her recommendation is not to do that. Her recommendation is actually like to develop the ability to tell, this is not mine, this is displaced, and then how to kind of acknowledge, and it's almost like send an invitation energetically back to that person, which in her experience has worked, that when she sends an invitation back to like process, heal, work with the thing, that often the person ends up doing that and maybe doesn't know why, but it's their work. So it's a very clear distinction of like, I'm not fixing, but I might be helping them be aware that like that's their work in a kind of energetic way. Now an HSP is more, and you can be both, but an HSP would be more about environmental sensitivity. And so not these displaced thoughts, feelings, emotions, but more, I'm sensitive to the things I pick up in my five senses. I'm sensitive to light, sensitive to sound, etc. She's very clear. So this was something that I thought was true. And then I looked it up, and I apparently the current dictionary, or at least some dictionaries, are saying that empathic and empathetic are synonyms. I thought it was that empathic was empath and empathetic was you have empathy. And that's what Hovem says. I think it's probably one of those, it's linguistically changing things. So it's a pet peeve of hers, clearly. But what's useful about that is that talks about how empathy or like compassion is a mindset and it's a useful one and is important, but like empath doesn't mean you take on everyone else's stuff, and I think that's the important part. So where I land with these 3 books is that probably all these terms, HSP, empath, intuitive, psychic, are all kind of overlapping. I still sort of pick back up that thread of kind of like, okay, so environment, like picking up and processing things, like where do I fall in there? I do think, it's hard to know, and maybe it's always hard to know, especially for neurodivergent people. Ironically, I finished that book feeling more like a highly sensitive person than I did when I read The Highly Sensitive Person, which is why I kind of want to reread it. But I am kind of wondering, like, wait, is highly sensitive person just neurodivergent? I would still really love for an author to talk about, whether it's Erin or someone else, to talk about the overlap and to talk about like neurodivergence explicitly and these other things and where they overlap and where they, are all neurodivergent people, do all neurodivergent people have X set of experience, or do most? Obviously it's never going to be all, but do most neurodivergent people have this experience? What's the bubble, right? Or most highly sensitive people, how does that work, right? So I'd love to know that. I would love to have more of an understanding of that, but knowing that it's hard to have an understanding of that. I think it's still it's really hard to detangle. I would also love to hear more people who are more gray area, people who are not so like, I have really clear visions and really clear insights, and I know that I'm pulling something out of my environment from you, and I know, and Hovem does talk about like, that there's a process, I think Cole does too, the process of like, it's not just like, there's like, 1 is, there's something, and then 2 is like knowing where that something's coming from. You don't always know, but I still get the sense that all 3 of these authors know at least a fair bit, get a sense of that. And I think especially when you're autistic, it can be challenging because it's sort of like, well, am I picking up on something that someone's putting into the environment? Or am I just misunderstanding their body language? Similarly, like, am I picking up on something from humans, or am I picking up on something from my physical environment? It's not always easy to tell. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it isn't. I am overstimulated by crowds. How much of that is the noise and and how much of it is the energetic? Like, I do get an energetic sense of things, but I don't know if we could ever fully detangle that, and maybe we don't have to. But it is something that I noticed and want to point out, especially if you're reading books like this, or if you're curious about these topics and you're still kind of confused. I'm still struggling with that. And also, like, the fact that I think if you're autistic, there's also this kind of like, it would be hard sometimes to determine, am I picking up on something that someone else, as I sort of said, body language, but there's also this like, sometimes if you're autistic, you don't always have you don't have a neurotypical understanding of emotion and what emotions are and what different people's, and it may be hard to communicate about those emotions. So it's just going to be really hard to verify what is and what isn't. And I suspect there is overlap between neurodivergence and these terms that people have used. And I'd be curious, I probably never know, but like, how many of folks who identify this way also are neurodivergent? Anyway, either way, even if you don't like come to a conclusion, which I maybe didn't, although I got some more clarity, I think that maybe the takeaway, if there is one, is just that, it's not to use these labels to say that you're unlike everyone else. Recognize that there's a spectrum, and sometimes if things are hard, they're hard, and it's okay to acknowledge and validate that wherever the hard comes from. And maybe spiritual development can be helpful for everyone. Maybe some of that more psychological development as well can be helpful for everyone. Okay, So that's it. That's the reading roundup. If you enjoyed this, let me know. Leave me a comment. What do you think? Have you had any experience with like any of these terms? Do you identify with them? Have you read books like this? And what are your thoughts? You can leave them below. I will also say that if you are struggling with sensitivity and neurodivergence and change and being in like an overwhelming world, especially if you are a people pleaser, those are things that I really love to work with as a change doula. And I'll have a link to my website below. There, you can definitely there's a link both to work with me, but also on the website there you can book a free consult, 30 minutes, and I'm happy to just chat with you about any of these topics or anything you're going through. Learn a little about you and your struggles. I can tell you about my work, but it is totally obligation free, and I actually keep a really good referral list as well. So if you're kind of like, I don't know what modality is right for me or what kind of support I need, I'm definitely someone who's more than happy to kind of help direct you there. And I will be happy in that 30 minutes to give you a couple quick tips or a couple quick insights into your situation, or just to give you some like affirmation. And the doula part of my title is really about holding space and holding you in your reality, and helping you to see things that you might not otherwise be able to see. You can also, of course, check the links below to full reviews of all 3 books, and if you want to purchase them. And you can follow me on Goodreads if you so choose. But I would love if you subscribe here, if you're not already, so that you will see when I have a new reading roundup posted, and I will drop those all in a playlist as well. All right, thanks so much. I hope you have a great day and enjoy your reading.